Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand.
Joey was shocked and sickened at what he saw happen to a blind man at the hands of an elderly woman. The story of Joey Prusak was featured on CBS News, and a transcript of the story was submitted to theblaze.com on September 18, 2013 by Oliver Darcy. You want to hear what happened? Joey Prusak was a cashier who worked at his local Minnesota Dairy Queen. He had been working there for about 5 years, and he had one special customer who came in regularly. But the thing is, this customer was blind. He came in often, alone, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. But one day, as the blind man pulled out his wallet to pay for his meal, a $20 bill fell down to the floor. Behind the man stood an elderly woman who quickly snatched the bill up off the floor and put it in her purse. When the blind man had finished, the lady walked up to the counter to order, and Joey took matters into his own hands. He asked her to please return the money to the man. She looked at him and responded, "What are you talking about?" Joey asked her again to return it, and when she said that it was hers and she was the one who dropped it, Joey said this, "I'm not going to serve you if you're going to be disrespectful as you're stealing someone's money like that." The woman started to get angry, started cussing and causing a scene. Joey stayed relatively calm, however, but the woman kept on going. Joey asked her to leave the store if she didn't return the bill to the man. The woman stormed out. What Joey did next, however, was astonishing. He went up to the man and said this, "Sir, on behalf of myself and Dairy Queen, I would like to give you the $20 that you happened to drop when you walked away from the counter." The blind man thanked him for his kindness in returning the money to him. Later, an anonymous customer who had been in the store at the time of the incident wrote a letter to Dairy Queen saying this, "I was shocked by the generosity your employee had, taking his own money out of his own wallet and to give to the customer because some other lady decided to steal something that wasn't hers." Joey said it was the right thing to do. "I felt it wasn't a right situation that he got ripped off by someone like that lady," he said. "It just wasn't a right situation, you know? I just got instantly sick," Prusak added, noting he frequently serves the blind man. "I just felt sick to my stomach." Now we'll come back to this story later. The theme of my talk today is that God wants us to be the light and stand up for what we know is right, even though it may be hard. A few months ago, I was given the task to talk to you about our school theme, Be the Light. Now this can mean a few different things, but in the instance of the story I just shared with you, it could mean standing up for what you believe is right. Now, how many of you have heard a certain VeggieTales song by the name of Stand Up? Anyone? Now stand up for what you believe in. That one. It comes from the movie Rack, Shack, and Benny. This song, for whatever reason, ran through my head until I came to the conclusion that I should tell the story of Rack, Shack, and Benny. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is found in Daniel 3. Now let's set the scene. We're in Babylon, where King Nebuchadnezzar builds a solid gold statue 90 feet high, 9 feet wide, and presumably 9 feet thick. So this sanctuary is about 30 feet tall, so imagine 3 of our sanctuaries stacked on top of each other. That's how tall the idol was. He put out a decree to all of Babylon's politicians and government employees, and he tells them to come to the dedication of his new idol. He did this in order to make sure that all the high-class people of Babylon were loyal to him. And thus, by chain reaction, all the people of Babylon jump on the bandwagon as well and come and worship the idol. On the given day, all the provincial leaders, including Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were administrators in the province of in the province of Babylon, gathered together on the plain of Dura to bow down and worship the idol. Now I have a question for you. How many of you here play an instrument? Whatever it may be, especially a band instrument. So you may be sitting in band rehearsal one day, and your director tells tells you all to play the first one or two measures of your music at the loudest volume you possibly could when they say go. How would it sound? If you played at the highest volume you possibly could, then you wouldn't all have the same pitch or mix together nicely, but you'd rather sound, well, not too good, I would imagine. Daniel 3, verse 4 goes a little something like this. King Nebuchadnezzar turned to his Babylonian band director and said, "You got the band ready, right?" Then he turned to all the officials standing around. "When you hear all the trumpets, flutes, trombones, saxophones, oboes, percussion, and any other instruments playing, fall down and worship the idol I've set up. Anyone who does not worship the image will be thrown into the nearby furnace." And yes, that was the Andrew Revised Version. At the sound of the instruments, all people, even if they differed in races, nations, or languages, bowed down to worship the golden idol. After a few moments, some of Nebuchadnezzar's stargazers came up to him and said something to the effect of, "Long live the king, may you live forever, blah, blah, blah. You issued a decree that said all people must bow down and worship your golden statue when they hear the sound of the instruments. This decree also states that those who refuse to bow down must be thrown into the blazing furnace. But there are 3 Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, your men in charge of the province of Babylon. But, your majesty, they're not paying any attention to you. They refuse to serve your gods and are not worshiping your golden statue." King Nebuchadnezzar flew into fiery rage. He ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought to him at once. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I've set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" Now, do you think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew that God wanted them to be the light and stand up for what they knew was right, even though it was going to be hard? Were they ready to be God's light? I imagine that this is like Joey from our other story. They probably had a funny feeling in their stomachs, you know? What Nebuchadnezzar was asking them to do was wrong. However, they didn't let their emotions and fear keep them from doing what was right. Daniel 8:16 says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you. We will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've set up." Notice our school theme is Be the Light. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were now willing to be the light in the fire. Adds new meaning to the saying, doesn't it? At this point, King Nebuchadnezzar was about to blow. So much so that it says in verse 19, his face was distorted with rage. Because of this, he ordered the furnace be made 7 times hotter. Translation, they're gonna die. The men who were tending the fire died because it was so hot. After this, he ordered the strongest men in his army to tie Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego up and throw them into the furnace. Now, if you haven't heard this story before, you're probably thinking, nice, now what? Story's over. Just like that, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would have been burned to death because of the extreme temperature that King Nebuchadnezzar had ordered the fire to be. Nebuchadnezzar thought he was done with them, but God was just getting started. Daniel 8:24. Suddenly, King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them in the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. Look, Nebuchadnezzar said, "I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god." He went as close as he possibly could to the door Nebuchadnezzar went as close as he possibly could to the door of the furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." Nonchalantly, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked out of the furnace. All of the provincial officers searched them, and they found that not one hair on their head was singed or the clothes on their bodies scorched. Shocked, King Nebuchadnezzar went on to say this, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any other god except their own. Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn from limb to limb, and their houses be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this." After this, King Nebuchadnezzar promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to higher positions in the province of Babylon. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shows us that God wants us to be the light and stand up for what we know is right, even though it's going to be hard. We shouldn't worry about what might happen to us if we do. We should remember that God will deliver us from whatever may come our way. A few lyrics from a song I know, performed by the Statler brothers, sums up the story well. They wouldn't bend. They held on to the will of God, so we are told. They wouldn't bow. They wouldn't bow their knees to the idol made of gold. They wouldn't burn. They were protected by the fourth man in the fire. They wouldn't bend. They wouldn't bow, and they wouldn't burn. God delivered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from certain death, all because they were loyal to him and didn't give in to King Nebuchadnezzar and his idol. Remember the story of Joey at Dairy Queen, who did what he knew was right? Well, guess what happened? His act of kindness toward the blind man brought a flood of support to the small Minnesota Dairy Queen. He even drew the attention of billionaire Warren Buffett, the CEO of the company that owns Dairy Queen, and received the offer to attend a shareholders meeting the next year and to fly there in Mr. Buffett's private jet. You don't have to make local or national headlines in order to be recognized for something good that you may have done. All that matters is that you did it because you knew that it was the right thing to do. Even if it seems like no one around you saw what you did, God did. And he's happy to see that you're sharing him with others through the kind acts that you do. Be the light and do what's right. Thank you.
At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. "Shout louder," he said. "Surely he is God. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." 1 Kings 18:27.
I'm guessing that many of you here have heard of the word apartheid. If you recall, in the 1900s, the country of South Africa was apartheid, meaning everything was racially segregated based on people's skin colors and their ethnic backgrounds. Adults in their 30s or older probably remember apartheid, including many of our parents and friends. Back then, South Africa was a much different place and time than how it is today. Their mindset was that if you were white, that you had special rights and privileges over everyone else, and that was because somehow you were superior. So it's not really surprising to note that the majority of South Africa's, if not all, leaders were all white. So for many, many long and painful years, Black South Africans faced mistreatment and brutality, discrimination, and injustice. They weren't allowed to go to the same schools, weren't allowed to apply for the same jobs, and if they ever expressed they were severely punished. Now we know that God created all of us and that we were fearfully and wonderfully made. We understand that He loves and sees all of us equally. But it took a certain man to help the people of South Africa, both black and white, to see that. His name was Nelson Mandela. Now, Nelson Mandela knew that racial segregation and discrimination was wrong, and he knew that he had to do something about it.
Beginning in the 1960s, he spoke out against apartheid. In fact, by 1962, he was considered a significant leader. Protesting against what he saw as wrong, he attempted to influence a change in the way the apartheid government worked. This took serious guts, because in an era where you could be shot just for saying something that the government might disagree with, not just anyone was going to try to ignite a revolution. In fact, just for confronting apartheid and attempting to change it, Nelson Mandela was actually locked up in jail for 27 years. But he refused to give up. Still, Mandela continued to shine as a light to show God and what he would want, despite the many challenges he would ultimately have to face. Finally being freed in 1990, he accomplished peace and equality and even became South Africa's first black president. Yes, you heard that right. A country where only whites had been allowed to be in any leadership position, within only a few years, elected no less a black man to be their president. What a change. Now, he was president of the whole country, thus effectively ending apartheid. I love what he said in a 1994 speech to the Zion Christian Church Easter Conference. Quote, "The good news was born by a risen Messiah who chose not one race, who chose not one country, who chose not one language, who chose not one tribe, who chose all of humankind." End quote. Nelson Mandela's story reminds me of another character in the Bible who decided to be the light and lead people towards God, towards the truth, in a time when everyone was in a state of confusion. His name was Elijah. Let's set the scene. At this time in Israel, God's people hadn't been seeking God, but rather worshiping idols and statues. You may recall the names Baal and Asherah. Well, 3 years before, Elijah had marched into Ahab's palace, and he had said, "No rain, nowhere, no how, not unless I say so." And then he had marched out. As a result, they have had no rain for the past 3.5 years. Mind you, no rain equals no food, so they must have been really hungry. Now be honest, who here has ever felt so hungry that they felt like they could eat an entire horse? Or for you vegetarians out there, a veggie horse, because I know not everyone eats meat. Yeah, they were that hungry, except all the time. So basically, in those 3 years, Elijah had been hiding out, first camping by a creek, then assisting a widow and her boy to stay alive. Now, hide-and-seek game long over, God calls him out of hiding and tells him to go find King Ahab. Can you imagine how Elijah must have felt when he's being told by God to go back to King Ahab? I mean, all I'm saying is he probably wasn't breakdancing out of joy. God had just told him to go before a king, an evil one, which would be no big deal except for the minor itty-bitty fact that this king wanted him dead. Essentially, he was risking his very life for this, because as one of the only prophets of God remaining after virtually everybody else had been killed off, just showing his face was enough to make him lose his head. But despite the danger, he decided to have faith and obey God, going to King Ahab just as the Lord had commanded. Now, Elijah meets Ahab in the woods, which does sound weird because apparently Ahab was out looking for Elijah. Anyways, Elijah declares, "Go find all the prophets of Baal and Asherah. Meet me on Mount Carmel ASAP. There, we will have a contest to prove who the real God is, and then we'll ask that God to send us rain." So, of course, not really understanding what was actually about to happen, King Ahab agrees to Elijah's request, and he gathers all the people of Israel and all the prophets of Baal and Asherah, and everyone shows up at Mount Carmel. Turns out that by everyone, he meant all the people of Israel. And if you guys recall what God had told Abraham, that he would make his descendants as countless as the stars, Yeah, all those people showed up to witness a huge competition between God and Baal. Elijah was going to have a packed mountain. I better not trip, he must have thought to himself. There were to be 2 altars. The rules of the competition were simple. Both God and Baal would each receive the chance to answer their prophet's prayers by performing a mind-blowing, unmistakable, inexplainable miracle, answering by fire on the offering. Whoever accomplished this was the winner and proved to the Israelite people that he was the one and only true God, worthy of their worship. Baal was to go first. The prophets of Baal chose a bull and prepared it, so all they had left to do was pray. So they prayed and prayed and prayed, dancing around their altar, all 450 of them, from morning to noon. Still, there was no answer to their prayers. No fire from the heavens, no answer from Baal. You know that awkward moment when someone acts like they're able to do something so cool and amazing, and then you're like, okay, fine, and then you finally see, but then it turns out they can't actually do what they promised they could, and it's just awkward for you and them because no one knows how to react? Yeah, it was kind of like that. There were crickets all around. That's when Elijah started to poke fun at them. He told them to shout louder because maybe Baal was sleeping or busy. So that's exactly what they did. The prophets of Baal, all 450 of them, started to pray louder. They shouted louder and even started to hurt themselves, which makes total sense because apparently the way to get a fake God's attention is through self-harm. But they did all that desperately hoping that Baal would answer. Can you imagine how desperate and frantic they must have felt? I mean, they actually knew that Baal was a fake. They knew this for years, and they'd been bamboozling the Israelites for years, just so that they could get money and a grip on power from the Israelite pawns. Desperation mounted as the day wore on. They probably might have even tried to frantically brainstorm some ideas last minute. I bet one dude said, "Hey dude, what if we faked a fire? Yeah, Elijah can't watch all 450 of us at the same time. Good thinking, Kezab." And by the way, Kezab means deceiver in Hebrew, so. But no matter what they tried or thought of trying, no fire started. Just like that, it was finally evening. Now, it was God's turn. Fun banter long over, Elijah gets down to business. "Help me, Lord," he must have prayed. "I can't do this alone. Please, help me." As he gets 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel and quickly makes an altar for the Lord, digging a trench around it and arranging the wood and the offering. Alone he stood, barking out orders like the referee of a sports team, setting the scene for God's stage performance. Now was the really strange part that must have had the Israelites scratching their heads in confusion. Elijah makes sure that 4 jars of water are poured over the offering, and another 4 jars, and another 4 jars. If you know anything about chemistry, you'd know that water and fire do not mix. So, logically speaking, fire would not be able to burn the wood because the wood was drenched in water. So now, the stakes were really high. God not only had to perform a miracle, but he had to do one that defied all the laws of science and possibility. All the Israelites held their breath in anticipation as Elijah stepped forward, while the false prophets of Baal cowered in fear. "Answer me, Lord," he loudly prayed. "Answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then, as if all of a sudden, faster than the blink of an eye, fire whooshed down from heaven and burned everything, including all the stones, the wood, the soil, the offering, and even all of the water that was poured over the sacrifice and the trench. The Bible says that when the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." Prostrate means lying on the ground face down. It's like a face plant, but you actually mean to do it. The Israelites must have had a heart attack at the sight, finally having it dawn on them what a grave mistake they'd been making this entire time, bowing before the shrines and temples of Baal, praying to idols that could never be able to hear them. It was just now starting to sink in how blatantly they had rejected the one and only true God for so long that reverent fear must have struck them instantaneously. As this happened, the false prophets of Baal, who had fooled the Israelites for so long, turning them away from God, were punished severely for what they had done. And God, faithful to his word, sent rain gushing upon the land that had been missing for the past 3.5 years, ending Israel's drought. Elijah's mission had been a success. All of Israel now knew the truth about Baal and had started to turn their hearts back to God. Elijah surveys the scope of the mountain as all of these things unfold. Smiling, he takes a step back from the fire that had just fallen from heaven, already feeling its scorching heat as it blazes through the offering. Smiling, he looks down at his people, who lie in unison on the ground, giving praise to the Lord that they had rejected for so long. Smiling, he looks up at the sky, watching the humongous rain clouds knit together for a big pour. Smiling, he thanks God in a silent prayer. But imagine if Elijah had not done this. If, in a world where everyone lived in darkness, he had not been willing to be the light and shine for everyone to see God. What if, when he had realized that all of Israel had turned away from God and that he would have to stand alone, he had been scared and overwhelmed? What if he had not obeyed God to lead the Israelites back to him? This story would have turned out a whole lot differently. Leaders often feel alone when they are trying to lead the majority in the right direction. It can often be scary and nerve-wracking when you're the only one in the room that seems to disagree with everyone else because you've decided to put God first instead of going with the flow. But you have a responsibility given to you by God to be the light by being an example. As Nelson Mandela nicely put it, quote, "And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same," end quote. Did you catch that? That sounds a lot like our theme for this year, doesn't it? Let's read it one last time. Quote, "And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same," end quote. The people around you will be impacted by your actions and influenced by your example, which will allow God to leave a lasting impression on their hearts. So remember, in a world where everyone lives in darkness, God calls us to be the light and shine for others to see him, even if we are the only ones.
You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven.
How many of you like glow sticks, glow-in-the-dark Play-Doh, or glow-in-the-dark shirts? I like them too. When I was younger, I had special stars that glowed on the ceiling of my bedroom. I would love to look at them every night. But in order to see the light, I had to plan ahead and make sure they were exposed to the light before the dark. I want you to remember that for later, okay? I'll say it one more time. But in order to see the light, I had to plan ahead and make sure they were exposed to the light before the dark. Have any of you ever caught a firefly or seen it glow in the dark on and off during the early summer? Maybe some of you have even caught them in a jar so you could see them glow in your bedroom after you turn off the lights. Maybe some of you have seen the Wild Kratts episode that tell us that the glow is the way the bugs use to communicate with each other. Maybe you have seen science shows about the flashlight fish, which has a similar on and off glow luminescence on its head. Scientists think they have it to attract or to blind its food. Have any of you ever heard of a glow-in-the-dark cat? Yes, a real living and breathing pet cat that glows in the dark. If you have a pet cat, you know that they sometimes get in the way in the dark and you trip over them. Well, with the glow-in-the-dark kitty, you never have to worry about that again. According to SeattleTimes.com, back in 2007, Korean scientists successfully cloned cats that glow in the dark. The cats glow red thanks to a protein that was cloned into the baby cats even before they were born. Scientists were happy to have glowing cats and all, but they were also glad because of the effect that this scientific breakthrough could someday have on helping heal diseases. They are thinking that since the glowing gene was able to survive and grow in the cats, that maybe someday unhealthy genes in people that create genetic diseases could be replaced with healthy genes so that fewer people would suffer these genetic diseases. Since 2007, they have actually cloned more glow-in-the-dark kitties, including a green one, that they think might have part of the answer for curing a disease called AIDS. Now that would be a glow that would have a long-term blessing for a whole bunch of people. Did you know there's a story in the Bible about someone who glowed and how his glow helped a whole bunch of people follow God? Let me summarize this big Bible story about Moses before we talk about the glow. You may remember how the people of Israel were slaves in Egypt, but then God sent Moses, there was a whole bunch of plagues, the people were freed, they walked across the Red Sea, and then they walked across the desert, heading for their new home in Canaan. You with me so far? Well, now the people of Israel were in the wilderness, and they had finally come to God's special mountain, to Mount Sinai. They were there for direct communication with God. They needed instructions on how to be a nation. They weren't used to thinking and choosing for themselves since they had been slaves. So God descended from heaven, down onto the mountain to be with them, and for the people to see that God was with them. God called Moses up the mountain to get special instructions for the people. Part of those instructions were the 10 Commandments and the instructions on how to build the tabernacle, or the temple. Can you imagine being Moses as you're right there as God's finger creates the words on the rock tablets that would become the most famous rules ever written? I mean, those 10 rules or commandments are memorized by millions and are seen as an ideal way to live by many. I wonder, when God made the commandments, was it noisy? Did the carving take a lot of time? Did rock dust fly all over? Moses was on the mountain for a while, getting the 10 Commandments and details on how to build the tabernacle. So the people started complaining. They said they didn't know what had happened to Moses, so they wanted a God to follow. Yes, this is hard to imagine. God is present right there on the top of the mountain. They can even see his presence in the light and sounds coming from the top of the mountain. But they still believe they need a God that they can put in a statue. So they convinced Aaron, whom Moses had left in charge, that building a golden calf was essential to their happiness. He built it, and many of them worshiped the idol. When Moses came down from the mountain, he saw that the people were worshiping an idol, and he got angry. Moses demonstrated that they were breaking God's commandments by throwing down the 10 tablets. They broke. To make a long story shorter, after scolding, disciplining, and rescuing the people from their self-destructive behavior, Moses went back up the mountain to get a new set of the 10 Commandments. Moses was on the mountain for 40 days before he came down again. While he was on the mountain, Moses asked to see God. That might sound really strange to you, but think about it. Moses has spent months with God. He has talked to God, and God has talked back to him. He has carried tablets carved by the hand of God. He has been totally depending on God for life, food, and shelter for months while being given very direct instructions. He trusts God with everything and feels total trust, respect, and love for his Creator. The Bible is quoting God when it says in Exodus 25, verse 8, "Let them build me a sanctuary that I may dwell with them." Basically, Moses feels very comfortable with God, so his request maybe isn't as odd as we originally thought. Exodus 33, 18 and 19 tell us, "And he, Moses, asked, 'Please show me your glory.' Then he, God, said, 'I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you.'" Wow! Fortunately, God knew how intense and surreal his own glow actually was, and that it would not be good for Moses to get what he wanted. So God told him, "You cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live." And the Lord said, "Here is a place by me, and you shall stand on the rock. So it shall be, while my glory passes by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and will cover you with my hand while I pass by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen." Weeks later, when Moses descended with the new tablets of the 10 Commandments, his face was shining, really shining. When Aaron, Moses' brother, and the people saw that his face was shining, they were terrified to come near him. Remember our glow-in-the-dark kitties? That would probably scare at least a few people if they saw one of those in real life. Think how much more having a glowing human. But Moses needed to talk to them. I mean, he has the new and recarved tablets to share with them, and a whole bunch more, so he calls them near. The people came to him, and he told them what God had told him. After talking to the people and seeing how hard it was for them to listen to a glowing human, Moses covered his face. Moses spent time with God, and when the people of Israel saw Moses, they saw God through him. After seeing God through Moses, they built the tabernacle. By building the tabernacle, they invited God to come and be with them and to change them. One way we should be like Moses is that we have to spend time with God, a significant amount of time. Not just spend a little time with God and then expect God to shine through you. Moses had spent 40 days in a row with God and a lot of time before his face shone. When we are with God, we change and become more like him. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 3, verse 18, "But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in the mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image, from glory to glory, just as by the Spirit of the Lord." This means that when we spend time with God, when we pray and sing praises to him, that we become more and more like him. And when we become more like him, we shine through the way we live, behave, and care as a light before men.
First, we took a look at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who went against what others were doing and did what they believed was right. They stood up for what they believed in, and they were the light for God in the midst of King Nebuchadnezzar and the entirety of Babylon. God saved Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the blazing furnace, and he will do the same for us if we call upon and put our trust and faith in him. Be the light, stand up for what you know is right, even though it may be hard.
Then we rediscovered the story of Elijah and his journey to lead the Israelites back towards God when they were in a state of confusion and chaos. We tried to understand how Elijah must have felt, having to be the one who had to stand up and help them, even though it was only him and God against everybody else. We admired his bravery and courage, his willingness to obey God despite any fears or doubts that he may have had. Just like another great man from history, Nelson Mandela, and his struggle against apartheid in the South African government. Both of these stories spoke of the timeless theme of trusting in God to help you be the light, even when you are by yourself against the whole world. Remember that you are called to be the light, and that no matter what it seems, you are never alone, so keep shining bright.
We can choose to strive to be a light to others. When we have a strong, lasting relationship with God, we glow with an inner light that God gives us. With this light, we can bring others to Him. This takes time. Maybe in your home, this involves daily family devotions. Maybe it means spending time together in worship activities, especially on the Sabbath. Maybe it means helping with the cold weather shelter during Thanksgiving. Maybe it means donating and helping others donate to the Orphan Project. Maybe it means choosing your entertainment carefully so as to show the glow of God instead of just the glow of a screen. Whatever it is your choice, my choice, our choice, how we choose to be the light with God. We are surrounded by darkness on every side, and yet we are told by Jesus himself in Matthew 5:14 that we are the light of the world. Jesus also said in John 8:12, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." So obviously, our light comes from his light, and the closer we stay to him, the more we expose our lives to his light, the brighter we shine. Here's a beautiful verse from Psalms 18:28. "You, O Lord, keep my lamp burning. My God turns my darkness into light." You've heard 3 stories, 3 examples of many from the Bible that challenge us to stand up, stand out, to be brave, all to be the light. I challenge each of us here today to be God's light, making a significant difference in our world and our community.